is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
It's the Past Our Prime podcast with your trio of hosts, Mark Hoffman, Bill Mahoney, and me, Scott Johnston. And today on the cover of SI, 50 years ago, Vasily Alekseyev. Who was he? Good question, Bill. Who was he?
The strongest man in the world. 6'10", 500 pounds. No, that's not true. He was 6'1", 324 pounds. The man could lift 500 pounds over his head, 600 pounds over his head. He was the strongest man in the world for a number of years.
You know, some people get me confused with him a lot of times.
I know they do. Mark, I looked right at him and I thought, that's Mark.
I remember one thing about him. Can you remember? Yeah. You guys guess?
Something in the Olympics?
His belly.
That's right. That's right. I always remember the groaning of the.
Yeah.
He had a rotund belly that, you know, as a 7-year-old, I thought, man, that guy's really fat. Maybe it was just, you know, what was needed at the time to be a power lifter. And he was a world record holder. 80 times he set records. But that's what I remember most about this Soviet Union amazing power lifter.
But you got to think about weightlifting. Think about it, especially like the snatch and grab. You have to have all that strength in your lower legs. And you're squatting and you're holding this weight, and then you're lifting yourself up, and then you've got to throw the weight over your head.
Is that what this is? I don't know what a snatch and grab is. I've heard it, and I probably just never looked it up. You grab it, just jerk it off your head really quickly. I mean, what's the?
Yes, yeah. It's what Trump said you could do to women when they're not looking.
That's it.
It'll get you 5 to 10 in Illinois.
Isn't it grab a snatch?
Yeah. Oh, that's what it was.
That's it. Sorry. I knew I was getting somewhere. I'll talk to the Tigers GM guy. He'll tell me.
Scorecard. Let's get going. Mark.
Well, this is interesting. It's at Detroit's Olympia Stadium. They're like promoting what events they're going to have that weekend. So it lists, you know, and you read it from left to right. John Denver will be appearing on April 25th. They have wrestling on April 6th and Alice Cooper on April 8th. That's a pretty good show. I would have loved to go to those shows. But if you read it vertically, it reads John Denver wrestling Alice Cooper. That I would pay a ton of money for. That would be great. And who would you win? Who would you put your money on to win that one?
Well,
you know,
I gotta think.
Wiry, smaller guys.
Do you remember Jake the Snake Roberts? And he'd bring out the snake in the bag. That was Alice Cooper's way of wrestling. I got to think Denver's just about to pin him, and all of a sudden Cooper brings out the snake, and all hell's going to break loose. So,
well, Cooper is a really good golfer. He golfs a lot, so he has some athleticism to him. John Denver flew planes, you know, so it'd be interesting. I put my money on Alice Cooper.
Well, I was scanning the magazine. I'm going to admit it, throw myself on the court of you guys. I read that magazine very, very, very lightly at the beat for about a couple days ago. And so I started looking up Alice Cooper, John Denver wrestling event. I thought it was true. I thought, did that really happen? That showed you how I started the magazine going, oh, this will be great. I looked it up on Google. I went to ChatGPT and I said, did John Denver ever wrestle Alice Cooper? I thought, this is great. How did I not try to get, you know, Alice Cooper?
They both did movies, you know.
That's way funnier than the actual story.
Yeah, I had no idea. Because when I do the magazine, I just look at it, you know, just like the first day or two.
Yeah,
and
see if someone
catches my eye.
Out. Yeah.
There you go.
Great.
But you know, they both acted in, you know, stuff like, you know, John Denver was an Old God.
Old God, yeah.
George Burns, and Alice Cooper was in the one with Mike Myers.
Wayne's World, Milwaukee.
Yeah, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. Yep.
After a dozen years as NBA commissioner, Walter Kennedy is retiring on June 1st to give the league owners ample time to choose a successor. That successor would go on to be Lawrence O'Brien. There's only been 5 NBA commissioners. I found that, I don't know why, that's stunning to me. So from O'Brien, it went to Stern, and then
No, there was someone in between Stern, I want to say.
Yeah, there's got to be, right?
There was one because Stern was a general counsel.
Maybe Kennedy wasn't the first one.
Yeah, because Stern then went to the guy that it is now.
Adam, that's what it is. A guy named Maurice Podoloff.
That's
the first one. Then Kennedy, then O'Brien, then Stern, and now Adam Silver. This is now his 12th season.
Dang.
Why would you want to give up that job? Think you're getting paid tons of money. You can go to any NBA game you want. The power you wield. I mean,
that's like that's like the NFL commissioners. There's not been that many NFL commissioners.
Oh no,
they stay for 50 years each.
I think the NFL makes the most money, so Goodell makes more money than than Silver or.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. There's only been 5 NFL commissioners, and only 3 since 1960.
I say, why would you give up that job?
Dang. That's like Pittsburgh Steelers coaches.
Right. Billy, what do you got?
Well, it's just about a kid, Kobe Orr. His magic number was 5. He was playing his first round of golf, and he sank a hole-in-one at San Antonio's Riverside course. Obviously, like we all know, because we're all big golfers, he used a 5-iron because his only other club was a putter. And he was playing the number 3, 103-yarder. But the one thing that was very impressive about it was Kobe's age. He was 5 years old.
Oh, God.
Wow. Some people go their whole lives without getting a hole-in-one.
And that kid doesn't remember 10 years later. Callie doesn't remember anything from him.
No.
Mark, they said it.
Brian Oldfield, shot putter on his former job as an instructor at a juvenile correctional institution. It was the only place I could teach and not have to go to PTA meetings.
Yes.
True.
Yes.
Yeah, smart man. That'd be a tougher job than shot putting.
Now, this next one we can all relate to because we all have older sisters. So, William Judy Johnson, Negro Leagues infielder who was recently elected to the Hall of Fame, on why he took up baseball instead of boxing, says, "I could only spar with my sister, and Dad said I couldn't hit her in the face, chest, or stomach. So all she did was belt me around."
Make her put on some padding.
Yes. Right? Come on.
All right, we're going to go from fighting to love conquers all. Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova meet in the finals of the Virginia Slims at the Sports Arena here in LA. It's the 5th time the two have met. They would go on to face off against each other 80 times in their storied careers. In fact, Chrissy beat Martina in this one in straight sets and is now 5-0 against the 18-year-old Czech. The next time they would meet, Martina would beat her for the first time, and then it was on. But the finals of this match were overlooked by the on-again, off-again, back-on-again romance between Miss Chris and Jimmy Connors. Billy, put on your TMZ hat. What's going on here?
Well, here we go. They're broke up. Jimmy Connors, Chris Evert broke up, had called off their wedding. And soon after, Jimmy Connors was seen with someone that Mark would know about. They called her Mean Mary Jean for a commercial, but she was known as Judy Strangus of the series Room 222.
Oh, I know who that is.
So they were together, but time passes. Connors dumped Strangus and is now back in cahoots with Chris Everett. The editor of the LA Times, you know what they reported? That the two champions were seen holding hands while shopping for furniture at an LA store. The first sign of love is shopping for furniture, I guess. But their engagement was broken off shortly before the 75 Wimbledon Championship. Connors and Everett briefly reconciled in 76 and 78 before parting for good. Connors would eventually marry Playboy model Patty McGuire in 1979, have 2 kids, and believe it or not, he is still married. Chris Everett, as we all know, remains awesome the entire time and still is today.
And that's the latest episode as
there you go.
Turns.
Yeah, Strangus.
No, Strangus, I remember her in Room 222. I always thought she was really cute.
She was.
Nice work, Harvey Levin. That was great.
Got it, buddy. I'm right there for you.
I bet you guys worked with Harvey.
We
Yes,
did.
they did.
Mark knew him. I knew him only very in passing. I think Mark knew him a lot.
Oh yeah, I knew him very well.
Yeah.
He's done pretty well for himself.
Yeah,
Oh,
he
he
did.
has. He credits. We had a news director who came down from Seattle.
Larry Perrette.
Yes, Larry Perrette. He credits Larry Perrette for all success because Larry kind of fired him and drove him out. He didn't want to work for him. And so that really got him going on, TMZ.
Hey, man, life takes
he's
weird
worth the
turns,
credit.
doesn't it?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Hey, though, the one thing I wanted to mention though about tennis real quick is that so Chris won 40,000 for this, and she's up to 121,000 for the year. Boy, times have changed. Could you imagine playing a tournament just to win 40,000 in tennis now?
Yeah, but you look back in those days, and that was
A lot of money.
that was a big ton of money.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah. Well, I mean, the funny thing is, it still is to most of
It
the world.
is.
To normal people, yes. But
Yeah.
we're not talking about normal people.
Yeah.
If someone walked up to us right now and gave us $40,000, we wouldn't
Oh,
go,
I'd be tickled to
yeah,
death.
thank
Right?
you.
Right?
Like, hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Be happy about it.
In the NBA, it's muscle, but in the NHL, it's brains. The playoffs are starting in both leagues. And for the NBA, it's almost about who isn't in the playoffs as to who is. Right, Mark?
That's right. The Milwaukee Bucks, who were in the NBA Finals the year before, couldn't even make the playoffs.
Wow.
It's the first time that Oscar Robertson isn't on the team. And then also, it's the last year for Kareem in Milwaukee. And so they started the year 1-13, the Bucks, and then they got good
Because Kareem was hurt.
right, and Kareem was also hurt. So remember, Lucius Allen would talk about that when he had him on the show. And then so they started 1-13, then they got hot, won 23 of their next, I believe, 37 games or something, and they were 500 again. And then they slumped to the finish, finishing 38-44 and not making the playoffs.
And in the ABA, Dr. J and the New York Nets, defending champions, they limped to the finish line as well, right, Mark?
They did. And not only that, but they lost to the Spirit of St. Louis in the playoffs. The Spirit of St. Louis. How many people? Some people might know that was the plane Charles Lindbergh flew, but how many people know that was a basketball team?
Is it Lindbergh or Lindberger?
Lindbergh.
Okay.
Lindbergh, like the cheese.
I know. I was hassling Mark.
I
got it because remember I used the word. My fantasy.
It's the cheese,
it's
man.
called the
Tigers.
Yeah.
because
Very good. Very good. See?
A lot.
Yes,
thank you.
1974, the Flyers won it all behind our guy, Bernie Parent. Billy, can anyone stop them from repeating? And if so, who?
Bernie Parent, because he's out with a back injury most of the season. That's the next year. He won the cup this year. They won it over at 74, 75. They won it over the Sabres 4-2. That was when Buffalo had the French Connection line. They were absolutely awesome. But it said brains NHL because they're talking about MVP Bobby Clark, who basically they said there's really no way to prepare for him because there's nothing he can't adjust to and nothing he can't do. So Bobby Clark was the brains. Could they make it 3 in a row, though? No, because Bernie Parent, like I said, was out with a back injury, and they lost to the Canadians in 4 games. Back in the Cup Finals, though.
Well, if you don't go under the couch, sorry, my cat is hiding because the dog's in up here. Get out from under that couch.
Go outside, and we'll see you in 3 weeks. Tales of Leo and Larry. Part 2 from the book by Leo Durocher and Ed Lynn called Nice Guys Finish Last, one of the most famous sports quotes ever coined by Leo himself. Leo was talking about player managers, which was the rage back in the 30s, but now in the 40s, not as much. The prevailing thought is it is just too much for one person to play and manage at the same time. Leo disagrees. After the 38th season, the Brooklyn Dodgers shortstop is named manager as well. And now, in present day, being 1975, Frank Robinson, the first black manager in baseball history, was going to be a player manager. He was going to DH as well. Durocher said he's the perfect guy to do both. So his money is on Frank Robinson being a good player manager. Didn't work out too great for Frank, but nonetheless.
Yeah, didn't Leo say that, what's so hard about swinging a bat and managing,
Yes.
And he also said that was a perfect time for Frank Robinson. He supported him and thought it was a great time for the city of Cleveland, that if they could, play well, it'll take off and get the Indians winning again, or the now Guardians.
That was the hope, at least. Yeah, this is like I said, part 2 from the book. A lot of great stories in there. Mark, any of them jump out at you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. July 31st, 1935, when, Leo is playing shortstop for the Cardinals, and they're playing the Cincinnati Reds. And that year, earlier in May, the Reds had hosted the first nighttime Major League game in baseball history. And they drew over 20,000 for that. This, I believe, was the second night game they played there on July 31st. And there was a girl in the stands, and somehow this girl by the name of Kitty Burke, Kitty, like Miss Kitty from Gunsmoke,
right.
Kitty Burke, actually strolled to the plate, grabbed the bat, and went to the plate to bat in the game, and no one could believe what was going. So she was this blonde. She'd been a nightclub entertainer. She was a baseball fan, and she was heckling, the players, during the game. And in the bottom of the 8th, time was called because 2 Cardinal players had collided. So they were tending to the player. So Burke saw her chance. She went under the rope that held the crowd back, grabbed a bat from the on-deck circle from Babe Herman, who was supposed to bat, and he stepped into the batter's box, daring Dizzy Dean to pitch to her. Actually, I think it might have been Paul Dean.
Paul Dean.
Yeah. So Paul Dean, smiling, just went along with the joke and lobbed an underhand pitch to her. She swung and hit a grounder back to Dean. She ran part of the way to first, and I think she was wearing high heels during this, but stopped when she realized Dean would beat her to first. The umpires didn't object. She would go on to promote herself as the first woman to have an at-bat in a Major League game, and even used a Reds uniform in her nightclub show. So
reminds me of Morgana.
Yeah, Kitty Burke, Miss Kitty.
Miss Kitty, making it happen. Billy?
Okay, I'll make this, well, I don't know if it'll be quick. I'll try. There's a guy called Larry McPhail, and he was the owner of the team when Durocher was managing. He said Larry was a genius. However, he also said this about McPhail. He said, cold sober, the man was brilliant. 1 drink, and he was even more brilliant. 2 drinks, and all hell happens. Basically, he begins to fall apart. Now, on that note, one day, McPhail, drinking with Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey, they come up with a plan. They come up with the biggest deal ever. They decided to swap stars Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams in what would have been the biggest swap of baseball stars ever, or at least in many years. But you know what happened? They woke up the next day. They weren't drunk anymore. So they pretty much decided the trade was kaput.
They would take so much hell because, everybody in Boston loves Ted Williams and everybody in New York loves DiMaggio. They would have not put up with it.
That would have dwarfed the Luka Anthony Davis trade.
Yes.
Just by a little.
Just by a little. That would have been like Magic being traded for Bird.
And also, the media-wise in Boston and New York were vicious back in those days, or at least they were tough. So to think Ted Williams would have to go from Boston's, breathing down the neck to the Yankees in New York doing the same thing, especially with a guy that they didn't like either way.
Now, I knew that Durocher managed the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants until 1955, but I didn't know he managed the Cubs from 1966 to 72, and then the Astros for 31 games at the end of 72 and all of 73. And when I saw this, I thought, hey, we could actually find someone who played for Durocher on that 73 team, and that's what we did. Jerry Royce was a left-handed starting pitcher for the Astros in 73, actually led the National League with an amazing 40 starts. He won 16 games, completing 12 of them, pitched a career high, get this, 279 innings. You hear that, Blake Snell? He would go on to win 220 games over a fantastic 22 seasons in the bigs, and he joins us now to talk about that season playing for Durocher back in 73. Jerry, thanks so much for taking some time to be with us today on the Past Our Prime podcast.
Well, Scott, thank you for inviting me. And, well, let's see what we can come up with.
Let's get right to it. This guy is famous for saying, he wrote the book called Nice Guys Finish Last. So right away, you can tell that being liked isn't something he cares too much about. You're 23 years old when you play for Leo in 73. How'd you get along with him?
Well, he was 65 years old at the time. And he had just finished his time with the Cubs. He got fired. And it was a surprise to me when he was hired by the Astros because the previous manager to Leo was Harry Walker. And Harry had been there a couple of years and was having his best season with the ball club. And suddenly he's fired. And the reason that the Astros gave was that they wanted somebody to take them to the promised land, meaning the postseason, something that Houston at that time had never done. So as a result, they brought him in. Leo just came into the clubhouse and he did have a presence. Make no mistake about that. If there was a spotlight somewhere and Leo walked in a room, he fully expected the spotlight to move to him and follow him every step. He was a sharp dresser. He was cocky. He was arrogant. He was knowledgeable. And he had a presence and personality about him that was unlike anything that I had seen up to that point and beyond when I think about it.
I mentioned the workload, and to compare it to what the pitchers do now would be comical. But he also had you in a four-man rotation, and he had you throw batting practice in between starts. Even for those times, that seems a bit much. Now, you're not one of those that has a reputation of just going along quietly. But as a 23-year-old, did you feel like you had no voice in these matters?
Well, in spring training, he had mentioned to the press that he wanted a four-man rotation, and he named his four starters. But none of the others ended up making 40 starts for Leo. I was the only one that did that. Hence, that's why I still hold the record for the most starts in a season on the Houston Astros. As far as throwing batting practice, I don't recall throwing batting practice between starts, but I do remember that even playing in the dome where it was a little bit cooler, it was tough getting around the middle of August and throwing bullpens because there wasn't a whole lot left in the tank. So it was something that was new to me, and it was a bit of a surprise because the most innings that I'd ever thrown before that was just over 200. That was when I was with the Cardinals in 1971. So to go from just around 200 innings in 71, and then in 72, I was just short of that, to 279, that's an increase in the workload. So it was something that I hadn't experienced, but I was up for a challenge. I figured the more chances I got out there to pitch, more chances I had to win.
What was your relationship like with Durocher? He started managing in the 30s, and all of a sudden now it's the 70s. Had he changed in terms of how he managed, and how did he get along with you and the players?
Well, it's a two-part question. We'll take the first part. I wasn't around, contrary to many people's beliefs, in the 1930s to watch Leo manage. So I really don't know what he was like and how he changed over the years as the game had changed. Now, I remember either hearing or reading somewhere that Leo said that players were different today. Well, of course they're different today. They were different in every era. Players that are playing today are different from the players that played 50 years ago. But Leo wanted to try something different. He wanted to be friends with the players. And that's a little bit strange having guys in their mid 20s being friends with a 65-year-old man. They played cards before the ball game, and Leo, among his other attributes, was also an excellent card player. They played poker, and Leo was always taking their money. Jimmy Wynn told me, he says, every time we played cards, I knew I was in for a beating because he took my money. And they played these card games. I can't remember whether it was every day, but it was often. And then they quit at a certain time, and then everybody went out in the field. That's quite a bit different than what you would see today. I never played in the card games. I respected Leo's ability to lead, but I wasn't real confident with the way that he handled things around the clubhouse because he was a bit of a tyrant. He loved the attention, and when he didn't get it or when something wasn't reported the way he wanted, he would sulk. He would get angry and reach out and attack somebody. And he did that with the Cubs, and he did that, I guess, with the Astros, although it wasn't so bad as he mellowed just a little bit. Leo was also superstitious. And there was one game when we were playing at home. Somebody had swung at a pitch, broke a bat. They were angry. They flung it toward the dugout, and it hit Leo right in the lower section of his body. Leo, upset with it, took that bat, fired it down the steps to the runway that led up to the clubhouse. Well, we came back in that inning and we scored some runs and ultimately won the game. He let everybody know that that bat stays there until he says it moves. We went on to win 5 more games before he finally said, let's get rid of that bat. It's done what it's supposed to do. Very superstitious.
See, those stories, the ones you just never find out, those are the best ones to get. How did Leo, pitching wise, how did he handle you when he would go out to the mound?
Well, like any manager, when he comes out to the mound, you can tell, at least I could, even at that young age, that your day of work is done. So I didn't always agree with him. And I told him that I had more left. And Leo says, I'm the manager here. I'm going to make a decision. And I always butted heads with the manager, and I said my piece, and then it was his decision to make. I respected that, but he understood that it was competitiveness, and he liked that. If, on the other hand, if somebody had said, "Well, I'm glad you're out here, take the ball," he wouldn't have had any respect for somebody. In order to get Leo's respect, you had to get him in the face. You had to go face to face with him, and sometimes it resulted in a shouting match. I don't know whether that led to respect with Leo and me. Looking back on it, I realized that he had a personality. It was a large personality, and it served him perfectly. As I said earlier, he was one of a kind, and the only person that I ever ran into during my 25 years plus a few years, 10, 15 years broadcasting, that ever had a personality like that.
So was it a love-hate relationship? Because I'm reading these quotes, like you would call him the dummy we had. He would say, "You have taking you out of a game. I didn't want the married men in the infield being killed because they were hitting bullets off of you." So it was like you were digging at each other, but it's almost like a father-son digging at each other and just having fun with one another.
It could be that. At least for me, I was serious about it. Now, thinking back in 1973, it wasn't a year from the personal side that I like to remember. There was a lot of personal things going on in my life away from the ballpark, and I was trying to juggle both of them, and yet I was still able to make 40 starts. Yes, we did have opinions, and we did express them. Leo expressed some of his publicly. I did call him a dummy, but that was when I found out that I was traded from Houston to Pittsburgh. And Jack Herman, a reporter for the now defunct St. Louis Globe-Democrat, someone that I had known since I was in high school because I used to read his columns growing up in St. Louis, asked me about Leo and some pointed questions, and I let it come out. I called him a dummy. Now, let's fast forward to 2012 to 2014 when I was writing my book. So I took a look at it, because now you could find everything you want, almost everything you want on the internet. And I looked up the 1973 season, 40 starts, 16 wins, 13 losses. Now, there were a number of no decisions and a couple of games that I lost in there that I wanted to know about. And the parameters that I set, it was a simple one. How many of those games did I have at least a 2-run lead? And I stopped counting after I found 8. And so I sat back in my chair and I said, I had 8 opportunities to win just 4 more games and be a 20-game winner, because this offensive-minded team was putting some runs on the board for me, and I couldn't turn it. So who was the dummy? I guess it was me for a number of years, because I went ahead and blamed Leo for something that was totally in my control. So, for that, you live and you learn. You make mistakes, and you don't let them stay with you. You move on from them, and hopefully you don't repeat them.
Yeah, I think there was another game where you were getting hit hard, and he let you in for a little bit, and then when he finally took you out, you get to the dugout and say, "What took you so long?"
No, I told him that on the mound. I didn't wait till I got to the dugout. I was getting hammered that particular game, and he left me in, and I thought, he's going to take me out after this. And I looked, and he was just standing there. And then another hitter came up and got on, and then something else happened, and the infielders are now wondering what's going on. Finally, he had enough. That's when before he said a word, I told him, I said, what took you so long? And then I read in his book, he said, you couldn't please this guy. He wanted to know why he didn't stay in a game. And then when I let him stay in a game, he got hammered. Now he wants out. You can't please him. Yeah, I read that. And I understand where he's coming from his point of view.
So if you've been 30 years old, though, do you think you've had a different relationship if he'd been managing the Astros and you were a 30-year-old player, not a 23-year-old player?
That's really hard to say because that's a what if, one of those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
I would like to think at 30 years old, I was a bit more mature than I was at 23. But again, you don't know the other dynamics that would factor in to a relationship like that. So, it was what it was. Now, I just finished a book on Earl Weaver in Baltimore. Somebody had written a book about him, and I read about him and Palmer going right at each other's face for their whole careers. And they had a love-hate relationship. Palmer ended up being a Cy Young Award winner a number of times, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame, as was Earl. So these relationships somehow just happened. And so I look at mine, it wasn't that unusual, but it just wasn't for that long a period of time.
Now, if you go back, forget now, I know it's not obvious at the time, but is there something about Durocher that has stuck with you that you've learned from him 50 years later?
Well, to finish the story, I wrote this in my book. It was years later, after I retired from baseball. I retired after playing for the Pirates part of a season in 1990. Then I took a job with ESPN as an analyst. And while working a game in Los Angeles, naturally, the first person I want to see is Lasorda and say hi to him, see how things are going. Well, I walk into his office before doing a ball game, and I look on his couch, and there was a little old guy sitting there, and I didn't recognize him immediately. And Tommy says, Jerry, how are you? He says, you remember Leo? And I turned and I looked, and there he was. Leo was sitting right there on Tommy's couch. He said, Leo and I had just been talking about you. Tommy took over the conversation. It's his office after all. And I said, yeah. I said, I remember Leo. And he said, you know what? I think you two I think Leo wants to have a couple of words with you. So I'm going to leave you here in the office, and I'll come back in about 15 or 20 minutes. I said, okay. So I sat next to Leo on the couch. We looked at each other. Leo started the conversation, and I heard that same voice behind this even older body. It said, I may have said some things. And that started a 15 or 20-minute conversation where we straightened things out, where we both explained where we were coming from and some of the things that if we could do it over, we'd probably do it different. Surprisingly enough, that was the last time I saw Leo. It wasn't very long after that he passed away. But I was glad that I was able to settle some things with him based on the relationship that we had back in the Houston days.
Yeah, Jerry, you can hear just the wisdom of you now looking back. And I'm not saying that maybe as a 30-year-old player, but how much of this stuff is just two really competitive guys at the top of their game, wanting to win and just maybe not seeing eye to eye on how to do that.
That happens with every ball club. I would be surprised if you told me there was a team that was in sync all 162 games of a season, that tempers somehow didn't enter into this, that personalities somehow didn't confront one another. There is no perfect team out there. There's no perfect world. There are guys that hate each other. And then after their careers are over, they find out that, hey, he's not a bad guy at all. There's something about the element of competition and playing in that spotlight that can change an ordinary person into someone that he's really not. So these things happen, and it's not a surprise to me.
We just been talking about Durocher, playing with him, but over your career, you played for some historical, amazing managers like Shane Deaston, Lasorda, Tanner, Pete Rose, Jim Leland. Who is the best manager you've ever played for? Who did you see eye to eye with the most?
Boy, that's a tough one.
I
That's
figured.
a tough one because at a given moment, I may disagree, but that's not my job. My job was to get outs. And once I got to that point in my life that I realized what's this all about is that you got to get outs. Get this guy out and get him out on one of the first three pitches. Once I embraced that feel, it was a whole lot easier for me. And I took a lot of other things out of the equation. What the manager was doing, who was warming up in the bullpen, how hot it was that day, how humid it was, where we were. We have a tough night of traveling for tomorrow. None of those things mattered. It was what Pat Riley, the late former Lakers coach, used to call peripheral opponents. And if you let them get in your head, then you can't get out there and do the job that you're supposed to do. So it took me a lot of years to learn how to do that. And then just focus on this particular pitch to this particular hitter with the goal of let's have him put the ball in play in one of the first three pitches. It worked for me.
You did.
Well, what stands out to you about your career? I would imagine it was in 81 finally winning the World Series, and in 1980 throwing that no-hitter against the Giants.
You know, I listed for somebody asked me, said, can you give me the top 5 moments of your career? And I said, no particular order. Here we go. Winning the World Series, winning game 5 in the World Series, pitching a no-hitter, pitching and winning in the All-Star game at home at Dodger Stadium, and my first major league ball game. Again, no particular order. It depends on the day and how I feel. But each of those were special days. And then to think of all the days in between that may not have made the top 10, but they were days when I'm reminded of it. And I say, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Like winning 2 games in Chicago in one day after not winning a game there for 10 years.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Or allowing the hitter to get a double on the first batter of the ball game, getting a double, and then pitching a perfect game after that. Or 2 weeks coming back, or 2 weeks later coming back and pitching a one-hitter, giving up just a base hit in the early innings, and then retiring everybody else. I guess it goes to show you that if you stick around long enough, there are going to be asterisks beside your name, both good and bad.
Yeah.
Now, this is the same guy who's gotten knocked out of a ball game in the first inning more than once. So you put all those things together and you just say, those are the ups and downs of being a major leaguer.
After the 73 season with Durocher, you're traded to Pittsburgh, hence the dummy comment. And you really flourished on some great Pirates teams. In the first 3 seasons, you win 48 games, 40 complete games, 10 shutouts. You're named an All-Star in 1975. Did you enjoy your time as a Pirate?
When I first went there, I didn't expect to, because I had heard a bunch of things about how rowdy those guys were. And there was rumors of drugs being in the clubhouse. Whether there were or not, I don't know. But ball players are a strange group. They talk about that stuff right out in the open in Pittsburgh. It was unlike any other clubhouse I'd ever seen. And they got up close and personal, and nobody was immune from it. So you came over there, they got on your case about something. Now, you couldn't pull this off in, let's say, the Dodgers clubhouse, because there'd be fights abounding. But in Pittsburgh, they said and did, and then went out in the field and just pounded the opposition. So it was a different way of winning. I enjoyed it. Once I understood what the game was in the clubhouse and how to differentiate between the way it was then and how serious they took the game when they were out there on the field, I said, this is a different way to win. This could be fun. I remember when I joined the club, Danny Murtaugh said to me, he says, we got a couple of good relievers down there, a couple of lefties, and Dave Justy, the right-hander. He said, you give me 6 good innings, you got a pretty good chance of winning this ball game. I remember I looked at him and I said, 6 innings ain't a ball game for me. I want 9. You save those relievers for the other guys that come in. Now, that's being a little cocky and arrogant at 24, isn't it? But that same cockiness and arrogance was the thing that drove me to go out there and pitch and win a lot of ball games.
Now we know you loved being a prankster back in the day. We had Jim Kern on a couple of weeks ago. He liked to have some fun in that regard as well. So while you're in Pittsburgh, it's not really a prank, but I just loved this story when I came across it. What happened the time you and Dave Parker happened to be in an elevator with Muhammad Ali?
That was in Chicago at the Executive House. And Ali was staying there. This was before those real nice hotels on the Miracle Mile were built. And Dave and I were on the same floor. We got on the elevator and it stops. And to both of our surprises, there's Ali. And he gets on the elevator. And I look over at Dave and his eyes were as big as saucers. And I said, I'm going to have a little fun. So I looked at Dave and I said, hey, you got a chance right now. Go tell him right down to his face how you'd whoop his ass. Ali turned around and he got that look. He looked at Parker and Dave goes, I never said that. And he stuttered and sputtered. And finally, Ali looks at me and says, I know. He says, I'm Ali. And he says, I'm Dave Parker. Nice to meet you. I put my hand out to shake hands with the champ. He looked at me and said, I already know who you are. You're an instigator. And so the two of them had a conversation. And for me, it was the longest 10 floors that it took for an elevator to go down to the main floor.
My favorite prank story, though, I think is the one that you pulled on Lou Piniella. Could you go into that?
Well, it was toward the end of my career with the Dodgers, maybe 1986. And I was rumored to go everywhere. I was an older player. They had some younger players coming along, and they needed the newspaper guys for Los Angeles stuck on a theme for spring training. Where's he going to go? Will he break with the team? And what I tried to do is deflect all of this and try to get my job done, because it wasn't a guaranteed thing that I was going to join the club in coming out of spring training. So I decided to play along with it. And I'd go into the press room every morning. He said, who's going to be here today to see me? And this was before I'd pitched in a ball game. And he said, well, here's the list of scouts we got. So-and-so, so-and-so, so. And I said, that would be a good one. I wonder who they'd offer. And so I played along with them. And finally, it carried on into the season. And I looked at the schedule, and we played an afternoon game at Wrigley. And the White Sox were hosting the Yankees that evening. So I looked at Rick Honeycutt, who had a locker right next to me, and I said, so I'm going to do something here, and I want to know if you want to come along. He said, what are you going to do? And I said, I want to go down to Comiskey, walk into the Yankees clubhouse with my bag and tell Lou Piniella that I got traded to the Yankees. He looked at me and said, are you crazy? And I said, maybe, but I'd like to give this a shot. So I went up to Lasorda and I said, I want you to get a heads up on this, because this is what I want to do. Now, we lost that game. Leon Durham hit a walk-off homer against us. So Lasorda was quiet in his office and probably a little pissed off about losing the ball game. And I told him what I wanted to do. He just shook his head. He says, every day you torment me, and now you want to go and torment somebody you've never met. He's an Italian, which he wasn't, but he says, go ahead. If I tell you not to do it, you're going to do it anyway. So I got in a cab right after the game, went over to Comiskey, first time I'd ever been there since high school. And I walked in the Yankees clubhouse. I told them, guard right out front, Jerry Royce, Dodgers, just got traded. He goes, yeah, go on in. So I walk in with my equipment bag that was stuffed with towels. And right there in front of all of the Yankee players and the coaches, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. And so I walked right into Lou's office, closed the door. I said, Lou, Jerry Royce, nice to meet you. He said, I know who in the hell you are. What are you doing here with that bag? And I said, didn't George tell you? He just made a deal for me. I could start, I could relieve, anything you want. I want to pitch and I want to win, and I want to do it with the New York Yankees. He looked at me. Now, Lou was a rookie manager that year, and this was in May. And he had just got thrown out of a game. In fact, one of his tirades, this particular tirade, cost him 2 days. He was suspended. So he couldn't get on the bench and manage the team anyway. So he was taking a shower and he says, what the hell are you talking about? And so I went on, tried to carry it on as best I could. Finally, I said, look in my bag. And he opened it up and he said, towels, what's this about? And I told him the story. And he said, you did all of this just to get on the press's side, just to have some news made? And I said, hey, We're in Chicago, the New York press, the Los Angeles press. This is going to be fun. He looked at me, he says, you know, I heard rumors about you and you are crazy. And I said, I've already done what I wanted to do, Lou, here. Appreciate your understanding and being able to take a joke. So I'm going to go head on out and have dinner. He says, no, sit your ass down. Let's talk a little baseball. Tell me what's going on there. I have nowhere to go. I can't get dressed. I'm going to watch the game on TV. So we waited until just about game time. And we were talking about the Yankees, the Dodgers, and all of the other teams in baseball. And that's where I got to know Lou. So I walked out of there, and that was the end of that story.
That's fantastic.
You know, I was going to ask you, who is the best prankster? I mean, obviously you have to be towards the top of the list. I think of Jay Johnstone. There's so many great Dodgers that were pranksters. Mickey Hatcher.
Those are some tough names to live up to. Mick was good because he would do most anything. He was naturally funny. Jay used to plan these things out. Jay used to just do crazy things, and suddenly you realize what he's up to, and there he is right there in front of you. I just enjoyed it. To me, it was about having fun. And I guess every player has his way to blow off some steam and to release some of the pressures that you have every day playing professional sports at that level. You got to get yourself through the day. And for me, it was laughter. So it worked, and it got me a number of years in a game.
Well, if everyone's going to do a prank when I can't just sit here by myself. Did you ever get pranked, Jerry?
Oh, a bunch of times. A bunch of times. There was, we had in Pittsburgh, it was my first year, we had an ammonia bucket. It was cold water. It was actually ice with some ammonia put in there. And from the trainers, I guess they popped these capsules, put them in there. And it was so hot and humid there on that turf, the guys would come in, grab a towel, soak it, and put it on their face. And that would allow you to at least get a bit of a breather. I was pitching one particular night, and I got taken out of the ball game. And on my way to the clubhouse, I saw that ammonia bucket right there, and I kicked it. And water went everywhere, and the bucket just exploded and broke into a number of pieces. I didn't think anything about it until I got into the clubhouse the next day, and there was a letter on my chair. And it said, due to the fact that you broke our ammonia bucket, we're going to deduct $7.98 from your check. And I went nuts complaining about these cheap guys. I can't believe this shit and this and that. And then the clubhouse guy comes over to me and says, what's the problem? And I said, can you believe this? They want to charge me $7.98. He says, well, you don't like that? And I said, no. He said, well, I'll take care of it right now. He grabbed the letter, tore it, threw it in the trash. He says, there, it's done. And it was then that I realized I'd gotten pranked. Stargell came over to me. He says, welcome to the Buccos. You're now one of us.
Now I know, Jerry, this isn't a prank that happened, but when you were in St. Louis, it can't be true that they traded you because of the mustache. Is that true?
Yeah, I didn't think it was. You have to go back to, I guess, the economic times and who was president. That was Nixon. And there was a lot of inflation back in the early 70s. And one of the ways that he wanted to combat it was to put a limit on the raises that people could get within a company, which kind of boggled my mind because he didn't put a limit on profits for any company, but he wanted to handle all of the working people. So not going to get any more political than that. So Mr. Bush, I still call him Mr. Bush, said that we're going to abide by what the president wants to do, and there'll be no raises for the Cardinals beyond the 5% of the total of amount of money that I'm spending on salaries. Now, right away, you know that somebody's going to say, what? Gibson had a great year. Carlton had a pretty good year. Other guys are having good years. If there's only 5% of the total salary available, there's not going to be anything left for the other guys who deserve some money. So the Cardinals and I had a way of negotiating. This being my first full season, I did it the way that I did it in the minor leagues. And that is, I thought of a salary and then how much of a raise I thought I deserved, and then doubled it, hoping that somewhere we'd negotiate in the middle. And that's how it worked every year. And then this particular time, I said, I'm going to see how far I can push this. So I asked for an amount that was way more. I think I asked for 32, and I was hoping to settle on 23. 22, 23, something like that, after I was making 17, which is a pretty good bump back in those days. Well, the Cardinals stuck by it. Mr. Bush came down to spring training as he did and delivered his address to the players. He loved to do that. And on the way out, Bing Devine, the general manager, and Red stood by Mr. Bush, and they introduced every player. We got a chance to shake hands and say hi to him. He saw that I was growing a mustache, and I didn't know this at the time, but he told Red and Bing, tell him to get rid of that mustache. I don't want any of those things like that around here. Now, that was a bit of a surprise because Richie Allen joined the ball club, as did Mudcat Grant, and both of them had these big pork chop-like sideburns that surrounded most of their face up to their chin, but no mustache. But that was okay with Mr. Bush, but with a mustache for me, somehow that wasn't right. Red had mentioned it to me, and I said, well, do we have a rule that says I can't do this? I don't have a rule about that. I'm just telling you. And I said, okay. Well, then I got traded. I thought it was all money until 1996. And I remember the year because I was in St. Louis visiting my parents between gigs with ESPN, it was the Angels. And I saw Bing Devine, the former general manager, who was now working as a scout with Houston. And he was in the press box. I was there. I said hello to him, and then I stopped. And I said, I'm going to ask the question right now as to why I got traded. I have nothing to lose. All he can say is, I don't want to talk about it. So I went up to him. I said, Bing, you got a minute? And he says, I got all the time you need. So I sat down next to him, and I said, I got to ask you this. Why did I get traded? And he said, you got traded because you grew a mustache. And I said, what? He goes, yeah. I said, the old man didn't like it. He told Red to tell you to get rid of it. I said, I told Red to do it. You didn't. And then he started calling me. And this was right after Carlton had got traded. And I figured there's no chance they're going to do it because I was the only left-handed starter they had. And so Bing kept receiving phone calls from Dick Meyer, who was the go-between from the brewery to the ball club, and told him, he says, the old man asked me every morning if you got rid of him. Have you done it yet? He goes, no. And he says, they used to sometimes let it sit for a couple of days because sometimes he would be a bit wiser about things and say, well, I feel a little different about it now. We're not going to do it. But it never happened. And he said, Dick Meyer told Bing, he says, I've got an ulcer coming after this Carlton thing and now this. He says, get rid of him. Do what you have to do, because he told me, and these are his words, if you don't get rid of him, I'll get rid of you. And so I got traded to Houston. Now, the interesting thing about joining Houston, I hadn't signed a contract. And before they would let me put in the uniform, the general manager, Speck Richardson, called me into his office. Now, he was one of those good old boys who could do gymnastics with a cigar in his mouth. And as he'd talk, he could flip that cigar. He would take it out, hold it here. It was like a prop. And he would do the ashes and he'd do this. And God, his office smelled like shit. I remember that because of that cigar. And he said, he looked at me and in that southern drawl, I said, son, I'm not going to let you put on a uniform, an Astros uniform, without signing a contract. He said, now Cardinals told me what you wanted. He says, I'll give you that amount. I'll give you that very thing. However, I will deduct from that the games that were lost due to the strike. I looked at him and I thought, let's get this thing signed before he realizes what he's doing. So I signed the contract. I got everything that I was asking for from St. Louis. Would have never gotten it had I stayed with the Cardinals. So in a way, I won, but I lost because I left the only organization that I knew, and I wanted to be a part of that for the longest time. But baseball has its own way of doing things. Now, that's a real long answer to a question of, you grew a mustache and they traded you?
And you still have it.
Still awesome. Awesome.
1980, Jerry, you have a great season. 18 wins, 2.51 ERA, second in the Cy Young voting behind the aforementioned Steve Carlton, who was selfish and winning all the Cy Youngs back then. Highlighted June 27th at Candlestick Park, a no-hitter. We're talking 45 years ago, but I bet you can still remember it like it was yesterday. Take me through some of the no-hitter.
The only reason I remember it is because I'm inevitably asked about it. And what I remember is that I didn't see anything extraordinary when I was warming up for the ball game other than the weather. It was a rare night in San Francisco because the wind wasn't blowing and it was reasonably warm, something like 75 or 80 degrees. And in fact, when I reviewed the tape of the ball game, Vin Scully made it the banner headline in his open. This is a warm day in San Francisco. We don't see days like this. And went on to do his open. Well, I'm pitching against Vida Blue. I had a history against Vida ever since we were both in the minor leagues. I pitched against him in the minor leagues, and he won that ball game. We both started the 75 All-Star game for our respective leagues. So once or twice during the course of our careers, our paths had crossed, and they were crossing again this evening. And the Dodgers fortunately jumped on Blue, got some runs, and I was out there pitching. And again, with that, trying to get somebody out in one of the first three pitches, that's the way that I operated. So I get through the first three innings. And of course, you look up in the scoreboard, you can't help it in San Francisco because it was the biggest scoreboard in the world. And it was just above field level, maybe 20 feet. And you could see everything that was going on the third base dugout from our angle as you walked out to the mound. So you get through the first three innings, and I was aware of what was going on. Yeah, I hadn't given up any hits, but you don't think no hitter at that point. Then you get to the fourth, things are going okay. And then about the fifth inning, I said, I've been through this one time before back in 72 with Houston, and it seems reminiscent. Well, I got through the fifth and then the sixth. And now with the game out of reach, the fans suddenly their allegiance shifted not from the Giants to the game, to what was at hand. Well, I went out there in the top of the seventh inning and I'm thinking, I got 9 hitters to get through. Let's do them one at a time. Got the first out, the second out, and I did the countdown, 9, 8, 7. All right. So then now I got the 8th and the 9th. I said, let's see what we can do here. Let's keep the same thing going. Try not to overthrow. Just reminding myself little things about keeping focus. Got through the 8th inning. I said, we're going to take it this time. We're going to get it going. Then I got in the 9th inning, a couple of quick round balls, and then Bill North is at the plate. And then I overthrew a pitch way high, and I knew it. So I walked around the mound. I said, get it back. Next pitch I threw, a tapper back to the mound, and I thought, you got all the time in the world. Fielded on the second hop after I picked it up, threw it to Garvey at first base. Then all hell broke loose for me because I'm jumping up and down, as excited as I could possibly be, because not only was it a no-hitter, but for me, the previous 3 seasons were terrible. I didn't pitch much in Pittsburgh in 78, 79. I was 7-14. And finally, things were starting to fall in place for me. And now I cap it with a no-hitter. So an interesting sidelight to that is that I looked at the pictures and I forgot totally about this, is that Sandy Koufax was there with us, a guy who authored, 5 of them? So he got to witness another one. And I was as proud as could be, the hero of my childhood sitting on the bench while I'm pitching a no-hitter, the guy who authored 5 of them. I said, it's an incredible night and one to remember. 45 years after the no-hitter, people say, people from all walks of life at all different times of my life have come up to me, either by letter, email, something on Facebook, or even personally, and said, you know where I was when you pitched that no-hitter? And they give me the complete rundown, something that happened some 40 years ahead of time. And it dawned on me, I don't own a no-hitter. I never did. It belongs to everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I was so flattered to think that something that I did on the baseball field had that kind of impact with someone that it has stayed with them the rest of their lives. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the fans. And for that, I'm eternally grateful, because to think, again, something I did means that much to so many people.
You can say that with so many things you did. You don't realize, not many people, whatever sport you play, you don't realize how many of those memories stick with people for years. Mark and I can talk about, and Scott can talk about baseball from 50 years ago and remember something. You don't really you realize how important you are to people's lives.
Well, you're right about that. I realize it now. In fact, I just got a letter last week explaining the same thing. I was 5 years old watching the game. We were Giants fans, and I was there with my grandfather, and he got more excited about the no-hitter, even though it was a Dodger pitching it against the Giants. And then when the game was over, he got up and started jumping up and down, celebrating. He still remembers that 45 years later, and all it does is bring a smile to my face.
The question I wanted to ask you, one of my favorite memories of you is after you guys won the World Series in 1981, I believe there were four of you, and I think you appeared on the show Solid Gold and you sang the song, the cover to We Are the Champions by Queen. How did that come about, and who out of you was the best singer, could really pull it off?
Well, none of us could sing.
And you can tell by the video.
Straight up. We did a pretty good job of shouting it, and we had a lot of fun doing it. Story goes something like this. We'll do a timeline. We won the World Series on a Wednesday night, got back on Thursday. Friday, the Dodgers had a private luncheon for all the members of the organization to come together. Speeches were made, and pats on the back, and everybody was just as happy as they could possibly be, especially beating the Yankees in the World Series. That was a big thing. So there was a lot of layers, a lot of texture to it. After the lunch, the PR department came over and they asked me, would you be interested in appearing on a program called Fridays, which was ABC's answer to Saturday Night Live. They did it the night before. Michael Richards, who later starred in Seinfeld, was one of the key players in this. And the PR department asked Monday, Yeager, and Jay Johnstone, as well as me, to make the appearance. And once we all agreed, we got in a limo. They took us over there. We appeared on the show. And after the show in the parking lot, Jay, who had a friend in the music business, got a phone call. He's on a public phone. And he says, hey, would you like to make a record? I started laughing. We just won the World Series. Yeah, why not? He asked the same thing of Yeager and Monday. Everybody was in agreement. So the guy who was the producer, and his name escapes me right now, but he said, I need to find out what key you guys sing in. I said, we don't sing. We don't sing in any key.
Off key.
Off key. Maybe that's even better. But he was able to put together a score and bring in the best studio musicians that Los Angeles had to offer. They put down a track. We came in. Now on, we came in on a Sunday morning and we did it. We recorded the tracks. We backed it with New York, New York, which is horrible. And so we had a record and they had to get it pressed. Somebody took the masters back to New York. They got them ready to be pressed and they sent it out. And this was on Elektra Records. Now on Monday, the guy who put this together, Bob Emmer, who was at that time with Rhino Records, said, we got to get an act together so that you guys can run with this. He said, we got you booked for the Carson show on Monday night. Now, we didn't have an act and none of us could dance that Monday morning, but we got with Barbara Mandrell's choreographer, and he put us through some licks. We were half good at them. I was horrible. But nonetheless, we took that to the Tonight Show and did it live in front of millions of people.
Wow.
By the time that we did Solid Gold that Saturday, by the time we got to that, after appearing on Carson, Merv Griffin, Mike, I can't remember his name. We did one more.
Douglas?
Mike Douglas, yeah. So we did all those shows and we did it on Solid Gold, which I guess had more of the lasting feelings about that because it's something you can find on Facebook pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched the tape of that compared to the Monday tape on the Carson show, we had it pretty much together, about as good as it was going to get. So I'm glad that tape exists. People see it and I still hear about it.
So keeping the silliness angle, we do a trivia segment here on the show called 50/50. You get a 50% chance of getting a question right from 50 years ago, roughly. So we're going to use Leo Durocher as the theme here, since that's how we started the conversation. So true or false? Do you remember the television series Mr. Ed, the talking horse?
Yeah,
True or false? Not only did Leo Durocher appear in an episode of Mr. Ed, but he was in the title of the episode.
probably. But I know Sandy was in that episode. I can't remember who else was there, but I do remember how they manipulated the bat in the horse's mouth for the horse to hit it over the fence.
So it is true. The episode was called Leo Durocher Meets Mr. Ed, and he's actually trying out for the Dodgers. He actually slides into home plate, the horse. Sandy was in it, Willie Davis, John Roseborough, Vin was in it, you know.
I couldn't remember all the players. I do remember seeing it.
Can I ask you, before you go, Jerry, can I ask one serious question? Because I
Yeah.
forgot. A while back, we had Ron Say on the show, and I meant to ask him this. But you were on the field in Game 5 when Gossage hit Rich Gossage hit Ron Say in the helmet. What do you remember about that evening with that happening?
Well, it was a late afternoon, Sunday afternoon game, and we had just gotten a lead in the bottom of the 7th inning. Guidry was outstanding in that ball game because from the 2nd inning through the 6th, he retired all but one batter. And of the 16 he faced, he struck out 8 of them. So he's running on all cylinders. And I'm behind by a run. And I remember coming off the mound after pitching the top of the 7th, looking up to the sky and said, "Give me at least a run, will you?" Well, I guess the baseball gods heard me and said, "How about if we give you 2?" And they had back-to-back homers. And on the course of 5 pitches, the momentum of that game and the momentum of the series changed on a Guerrero home run on a hanging slider and Yeager hitting a home run on the fastball right down the middle. So it was a 2-1 lead. The momentum was on our side. I got through the 8th inning. Then in the bottom of the 8th, it was Gossage and Say up there. They wanted to get Gossage in the game to hold things. And then Gossage, who didn't appear in the game the day before, let loose with a fastball, and it was right at Say's head, and down he goes. And 56,000 people who were screaming, and you could probably hear it all the way to Burbank. Suddenly, the stadium gets quiet because Say is laying motionless on the ground in the batter's box. And all of us just kind of sat there waiting for him to move. Well, our trainer goes out and then a few other people go out and they finally are able to help him off the field and immediately take him to the training room. And then it was our job after the emotional bottom of the 7th and then the emotions going south in the bottom of the 8th to go back out there in the 9th inning and try to win this ball game. Boy, you talk about a range of emotion that one experiences during the course of their life. This is about as emotional as it gets. You're on the top of the world with a chance to win a World Series game, and yet at the same time, a teammate was felled by a fastball that got away from a guy who throws upwards of 95 miles an hour.
Well, you guys, Say gets off the deck. He's one of the MVPs of the World Series that year. You win Game 5, you win Game 6, and you're World Series champion. So a happy ending for sure for you and Dodger Blue that year. 220 wins, 127 complete games, 39 shutouts, a great pitcher, and a great conversation with Jerry Royce, author of, I have to get this in there, Bring in the Righty, one of the greatest titles ever for a book. Love that. So played for Leo Durocher back in 1973 and lived to tell about it. Jerry Royce, everyone, thanks for joining us on the Past Our Prime podcast.
Scott, Mark, Bill, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jerry.
And want to wish you all the best.
Same here.
That's great. You were great.
Thank you so much. Now, it's kind of difficult to sometimes get a guest. And on this one, in particular, because the guy who's on the cover has been dead for about 15 years. So that makes it very difficult to get him to comment. So we kind of did a little digging. And when it came to Leo Durocher, like I mentioned, I was shocked that he managed as late as 1973. And so hence I looked up Jerry Royce and Billy, Jerry Royce, as it turns out, you have a connection with him.
I do. I lived in Vegas, and Jerry Royce and I were in a voice class together for a number of sessions with a young lady named Alice Whitfield. And we just got to talking. We would talk every week we talked for about 5, 10 minutes, just sort of reminisce about baseball and Vegas and all the stuff about that. But Alice really, really liked Jerry. She wasn't so much a fan of me. So like Jerry would do something, she'd go, "Oh, Jerry, come over here." And she'd go, "Bill, sit down. Bill, you stop talking." Like, okay, sorry. So I would just, I'd be sitting there, but she was a great teacher and she both helped Jerry and I a lot, but that's how we actually knew each other. So when you wrote me and said, "Try Jerry," I wrote him, he said, "Oh yeah, great. I remember you." Yeah. Just a really, really Superman and obviously a great baseball pitcher, but just a better person.
Yeah, and you both have great voices. I could see how you would have announcer voices and stuff.
Yeah, that's before you guys got on camera. He was asking me to do my I did a video game many years ago for a kid, and so he wanted me to do the zombie, voice thing I had to do. I was the DJ of a zombie overrun city. So,
ooh, what does that sound like?
Let's hear it.
oh, yeah. Just I'm Dickie Smith from KCWW. You're all gonna die, but what you need to do is listen to me, and I'll tell you how to get out of this town and get away from this hell that has come upon this town.
That's good. I can understand why the voice coach hated you.
Yeah.
Oh, because I'm always talking, and so I'd be gabbing. Bill.
Focus.
You should have just said, "I'm practicing my voice."
Exactly. No, but can I tell you one story about Durocher?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about Leo Durocher, you always think tough guy, spitting tacks, spitting nails, I should say, manager of whatever, 3, 4 ball clubs. Back toward the end of his life, I was at a Costco a while back and I was talking to the girl that was helped put my glasses frames together. We got talking about it. She goes, "I know Leo Durocher," or I knew him. He died in, I think, Palm Desert years ago. At that time, she worked for Save on Drugs and she used to deliver medicine to Leo's house. And she goes, "I didn't know who he was." She goes, "He was Mr. Leo to me." She goes, "I would go to his house. I'd bring his drugs to him." And he goes, "All he wanted to do was talk." She goes, "But the thing is," she goes, "he had stacks and stacks and stacks of memorabilia all over his apartment." She goes, "It was like floor to ceiling of amazing things." She goes, "But I didn't care about sports." She goes, "I just wanted to deliver it, get my $3 and go back home." She goes, "But he asked me every day to stay and talk with him." And she goes, "I didn't realize who he was until he died."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's, the people you meet along the way as a kid, you don't even realize that maybe they've done quite a bit like Durocher did.
Well, and the other thing about that is, here's this man who's lived this kind of incredible life, and at the end, all he wants is some companionship.
That's Scott. I was going to say that's a great way to put it. You do so much around people and crowds that are cheering you on, and a lot of times in life you forget about a family, and you end up, dying the way he did. I'm not saying he was unhappy, but she goes, each and every day, go, "No, please stay and talk. I'll talk." And she'd go, "I was 16." She goes, "I just want to go home."
Wow.
Yeah. The cover man on the April 14th, 75 issue of SI, as I mentioned, is Vasily Alekseyev, a power lifter from the Soviet Union. Like I said, I remember his rather large belly, but at age 33, he weighs 324 pounds, despite standing to 6'1". Strongest man in the world, the first man to ever lift 500 pounds. He won Olympic gold in both 72 and 76. He lives in a small village in Russia behind the Iron Curtain. The interview is somewhat predictable and generic. Everything's fine. You don't get a real glimpse of what life is like in the USSR for one of the country's biggest stars. But if you ask him, he will tell you he's great at everything.
He did.
Singing, gardening, volleyball. He could do it all despite being 6'1", 325 pounds.
Yeah, you probably stand out in that town. But I'm reading about this town. I guess you pronounce it Shakti or whatever it is. And it sounds really nice. It's got like a park, there's sidewalk cafes, ponds, people just walking around. It could
not what you would picture,
right?
As the Soviet Union, not to me at least.
No, it could be Middletown America for all I know.
Well, I have to say, Scott, you talked about him saying he could do everything great, and you mentioned the singing. Well, I don't know. I don't know about you, but if you work out or run, don't you normally put songs on that are maybe a little bit more upbeat?
Yeah.
He said, we sing often songs of winning and songs of workers because he would sing with the Soviet weightlifting team. What kind of songs they sing about? Well, we sometimes sing about trenches and war, and sometimes about the dawn flowing red with blood. Damn.
Wow.
Damn, man. Bill, what are you listening to on your workout? Ted Bundy sings. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, red, the dawn flowing red with blood.
I want to kill you. I'm going to take my knife.
And his wife's name was Olympiada, which I thought was very weird.
Yeah, and there's a picture of them. They're all having a meal that actually cooked. And they got eggplant, which is really good, a lot of apples and red vegetables and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you
It's a
see
good
him,
meal.
answer me a question. Why is it a lot of these big dudes always do something like gardening? Remember Rosie Greer did the needlepoint?
Right.
That's why he's
That's
still
one of the
alive.
guy, but yeah, because you see
You have a hobby.
Vasilov, whatever, you see him, Alexeyev, sitting by a garden all bent over. So it's always they go to these sort of light, kind type of hobbies.
Yep. But he was a USSR guy through and through. He definitely
No question.
represented that era very well for the athletics. A week ago, UCLA won their final championship under John Wooden, and he went into literally rode into the sunset, just off of Sunset. And as we go to the For the Record section, who's going to replace him?
It's going to be Gene Bartow, who's 44 years old at the time. So Bartow had coached Memphis when they had, Memphis State, when they played UCLA in the finals, when Bill Walton had that incredible game, the 21 out of 22, shots. He had so he had a really good job. When he was at Memphis State, he compiled a record of 82 and 32 from 1970 to 74. That's pretty impressive, right?
Mm-hmm.
He then takes the job at Illinois, and he leaves Illinois with 4 years left on his 5-year deal. He had gone 8 and 18 that first season in Illinois. Imagine you're hiring someone to replace Wooden, who was 8 and 18. Any coach in America, if you told their fan base, we're replacing your legendary coach with a guy, I don't care what he did, the years before, he was 8 and 18 last year. I mean, that would be like the Denver Nuggets firing Michael Malone. Oh, wait, they did.
Yeah. As we found out after all these years, there's still a Wooden mystique. I mean, it was impossible to replace. Bartow really stepped into an impossible situation, and that has somewhat remained. They're always going to be compared to Wooden.
Mark, why were they unable to get Denny Crum?
So Denny Crum, the plan was always, I think, for Denny Crum to come back. He left and took the Louisville job a few years before Wooden retired. And then he just felt it was too soon for him to abandon Louisville to come back.
Okay.
But they had a window to get him, and they missed that window, and then he had so much success. Had they hired Denny Crum, he probably would have been the coach another 30 plus years at UCLA.
And might have won more titles.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he knew the system and he had the connection.
Right. But I think anyone that follows Wooden might have failed. So Bartow was there for 2 years. And his first year, they went to the Final Four. They just lost to Indiana, who didn't lose to anyone that year.
Right.
And so he had his record of the 2 years at UCLA was very good, but it was just too much pressure. He left, and then they promoted Gary Cunningham, the assistant coach, to be their coach, and he lasted 2 years. So this idea of had Crum still been there in 75, maybe they would have promoted him right then and there. I don't know.
Probably. Bill, what do you got?
Ron Bryant, St. Louis pitcher Ron Bryant, after giving up 17 runs in just over 8 innings, he decided to call it a career and retire. For those of you that are Giant fans, you might remember Ron Bryant because he won 24 games for the Giants back in 1973. So Ron Bryant called it a career.
Yeah, so 73, he wins. What did you say, 25?
24 and 12.
24
He
and
won
12.
14 prior and 14 and 72, 24 and 73. He won 3 games the rest of his career.
Wow.
We mentioned this last year. Could you imagine doing a fantasy baseball draft and the year after he wins 24 and you take,
oh, God, yeah.
He'd go high.
He would.
Boy, he would have screwed you.
Oh, God, yeah.
Bob McAdoo, Buffalo Braves center, is the NBA's most valuable player. 6'10" McAdoo averaged 34.5 points per game this season to lead the league in scoring for the second straight year. 2 weeks from now, the Buffalo Braves are on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Gar Hurd, to be specific, on that really good Braves team that was in the playoffs. We'll talk with Gar Hurd about playing with Bob McAdoo and that Braves team, and one of the greatest shots ever made in NBA Finals history with Gar Hurd in a couple of weeks. Faces in the crowd, Bill.
Doug Duell, he was a wrestler. He graduated from Goodland High School and was the first 4-time state wrestling champion in Kansas history, winning in 72, 73, 74, and 75. He did go to college, but injuries hindered him, and then he retired and went into being a wrestling coach.
Good for him. Giving back. Hey, that's going to wrap things up for this episode. I want to once again thank Jerry Royce for coming on and talking about his time playing for Leo the Lip Durocher, the guy who said nice guys finish last. Royce proves that's not always the case. Love talking to these old guys, and I hope they enjoy it as much as we do.
Yeah, he was a wonderful interview. He was great, and the stories he could tell, and it was just, it was a really good guest, really good.
Yep, I agree.
Good job, boys.
For Mark and for Bill, thanks for listening. I'm Scott, and we are past our prime.
See ya.
Bye-bye.